Greetings builders! How was your first day on Settlers of Kalguur? I hope everyone is doing great and gearing up for endgame. Today I have a very special video, and that's because you guys were responsible for it. As you know, last week I released 12 starter builds and asked you on the community tab about your favorites. Now, thousands of votes later, here are the results. The first 3 builds to compete for your votes were the Bone Shatter Juggernaut, the Lightning Strike Trickster and the Cyclone of Tumult Slayer. And as you can see, it spins and it wins because Cyclone of Tumult took the prize home. Now let's talk about him, the powerful Cyclone of Tumult Slayer with the Duelist class. The last PoE expansion brought the Transfigured gems with it. This means an alternative version of active steel gems. The Cyclone skill got the Cyclone of Tumult, that is a Cyclone wider and more powerful, but with the downside of being a lot slower. However, with an easy trick we can remove this downside and simply have a Cyclone with 33% more damage and 40% more error effect. To list the pros of this build, I would start with its clear speed. It's just amazing to be always moving and massacring all the poor enemies on the way. The boss damage is also incredible. Once the build is done, you are going to kill even the big bosses in just a matter of seconds. And above all of that, this build is very simple and easy to put together. Now, to list the cons, I would point a few important issues and I'd like to ask you to pay close attention here. You see, this build has a great survivability once it's done, but when you're leveling your character you need to pace your progression, because you're always very close to enemies. If you're not prepared, you are going to die. So take the extra time to pick up a few more levels before progressing to a high tier content. Another useful tip about your survivability is how to deal with stuns. On this build, you get stun immunity with cluster duels, but not everyone can afford them right away. If that's your case, or if you're just having problems with stuns sooner, do this simple trick of picking those evasion nodes and this mastery. Believe me, it helps a lot. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps you need to invest around 115 chaos, and for easily completing your atlas I recommend investing around 6 divines. Don't forget that on PoEbuilds.net you can find a list with all the equipment that you need to buy for this build, with direct links for examples being sold by other players. You only need one mandatory unique item for this build, the Stampede boots that guarantee that your movement speed will always be 150% of its pace. This means that the downside of Cyclone of Tumult will mean absolutely nothing to us. For clear speed I'll give it 9 out of 10. Cyclone never stops moving and have a huge error effect, so you can farm your maps without the need to stop for casting or anything like that. It's just awesome and very satisfying. The boss damage is just amazing and deserves 10 out of 10. When this build is done, you're going to easily achieve over 15 million DPS, that is more than enough to destroy bosses in just seconds. Now for the survivability, I'll give it 9 out of 10. This build achieves over 100,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion, spell suppression, fortify, and a lot of instant life reach. Now, with the huge Hour of Effect bonus from Cyclone of Tumult, you don't even need to stay very close to enemies on endgame, what gives you even more survivability. Next, the battle was between the Ultimate Sweep Slayer, the Infernal Flicker Strike Ascendant and the Fire Cyclone Berserker, and once again the Cyclone lovers granted the prize. And it's time to talk about him, the Fire Cyclone Berserker with the Marauder class. This build converts 100% of Cyclone's damage into fire to clear endgame maps like an amazing flame tornado. To list the pros of this build, I would start with the clear speed. With Cyclone you never need to stop moving, and that spin to win feeling is just awesome. This build also has a great single target damage with not much investment. Now to list the cons, the main issue of this build is survivability. Even though this build has many defensive layers, it also needs to stay very close to enemies, which is a vulnerable position. And as a berserker you already take 10% increased damage. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps you need to invest around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your atlas I recommend investing around 6 divines. Otherwise your survivability won't be enough and you'll end up dying a lot. You need 2 mandatory unique items for this build. The first one is the Gamahu's Flame Axe that already converts 60% of your physical damage to fire, grants 20% fire penetration and triggers Molten Burst on hits for a lot more single target damage. Next, we also need a Stampede boots that guarantee that our movement speed is always 150% of its base. This is great because now we can replace the regular Cyclone with Cyclone of Tumult for a lot more damage and area of effect. For clear speed, this build gets 9 out of 10. As mentioned before, Cyclone is an awesome skill that never stops moving. You just need to slide through the maps, killing everything that gets near. The boss damage is amazing, deserves 10 out of 10. Now with Cyclone of Tumult we have a lot more attack speed to trigger Molten Burst many times and destroy even the biggest bosses in just a few seconds. The survivability on the other hand gets 7 out of 10. Even though this build has a great life pool, permanent fortify, high armor, high evasion and spell suppression, it's always in a vulnerable position, very close to enemies. That might be a little frustrating if you try high tier maps without investing in your survivability. Now in the arena we had 3 classic starters, the Toxic Rain Pathfinder, the Essence Drain Occultist and the Arc Totem Hierophant. And this time the Essence Drain drained the votes out of its opponents and came in first place. And now it's her time, the Corrosive Essence Drain Occultist with the Witch class. Essence Drain is a skill that drains the life of your enemies and even restores your life by a percentage of the damage dealt. Since it can only be used in one enemy at a time, we also use Contagion to spread the damage, resulting in an amazing increase in clear speed. To list the pros of this build, I would start with how easy it is to play. You just need to cast Contagion and Essence Drain to watch the whole screen of enemies melting before your eyes. This character is also very easy to put together because it doesn't need any mandatory unique item, and above all of that, it's very safe with many defensive layers. Now to list the cons, the first thing that comes to my mind is the boss damage. Even though this is a very cheap build, you need to invest several Divine Orbs to have a big single target damage. But don't worry too much about that, this build is meant as a red map farmer and it kills map bosses easily even on a low budget. As for budget, this build is very cheap, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 35 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps you need to invest around 100 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas I recommend investing around 4 divines, but you can totally do it with less. For clear speed I'll give this build 10 out of 10. When you get a big area of effect in your Contagion, you kill enemies way beyond your sight with only one cast. The boss damage on the other hand is a 7 out of 10. It will take longer than usual to kill Guardians and Pinnacle bosses, but you have no problem against regular map bosses. For the survivability I'll give it 9 out of 10. This build comes with over 100,000 effective HP because of high armor, high evasion, spell suppression, amazing life regeneration and even a little bit of block chance. Finally we had 3 powerful starters on the ring, the Righteous Fire Chieftain, the Archer Skeleton's Guardian and the Venom Gyre Deadeye. And as you can see, we had a real stomp here, with the Righteous Fire burning his opponents out of existence. And let's talk about the winner, the smoking hot Righteous Fire Chieftain with the Marauder class. This is probably the easiest way to have such a strong presence. You just need to walk past the enemies and they will melt and explode without even touching you. To visit the pros of this build, I would start with how simple it is. Because of the Chieftain Ascendance, you only need to stack fire resistance to have all elemental resistance. Because of that, you can also easily cap your chaos resistance. Keeping on that topic, also because of the Chieftain Ascendance, you can also easily have 90% resistance to all elements, making you very tanky without much investment. Above all of that, Righteous Fire is a super fun and smooth build to play because you just run and shield shard your way through many maps per hour. Now to visit the cons, I'll start saying that this build doesn't have a big single target damage without a lot of investment. But don't worry, you'll be able to kill map bosses easily even on a low budget. This build is an amazing league starter and it's meant as a cheap and fast currency farmer. As for budget, this build is cheap, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 70 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, I recommend investing around 120 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas, you need to invest around 4 divines, mostly in your survivability. You only need 2 mandatory unique items for this build. The first is the Rise of the Phoenix Shield that grants up to 200 life regeneration per second, and most important, plus 5% to maximum fire resistance. Next, we also need the Cloak of Flames armor that grants 40% of the physical damage you take to be received as fire damage. This is great because we have 90% fire resistance. For clear speed I'll give it 10 out of 10. You just need to run through the maps and enemies will die just because of your presence. It's super smooth and one of the best clear speed experiences you're going to have on PoE. The boss damage on the other hand is not great. I'll give it only 7 out of 10 because you need a lot of currency to scale single target damage, but as I mentioned before, this is meant as a map farmer and you can kill map bosses easily on a low budget. For this survivability, I'll give it 9 out of 10. Thanks to the shift and ascendance you can get 90% of all elemental resistance and even easily get maximum chaos resistance, all of that combined with over 2000 life regeneration. I only took 1 point out because it needs more investment to be able to face tank physical bosses. And that's it for today guys, are you playing any of those starter builds? Please take a second to tell me in the comments and leave a thumbs up to support the channel. I wish you all an amazing day and don't forget to keep building!